Hello, and welcome to Nature Connects. Nature Connects is Massachusetts TNC's webinar series that connects you with scientists, experts, and influencers, and our partners from New England and around the world. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Allison Bowden, TNC and Massachusetts Director of Rivers, Coasts, and Oceans, and your host for today. Here at the Nature Conservancy in Massachusetts, we're dedicated to creating a healthier world for all. We work locally and globally, using innovative science and scalable, long-lasting solutions to tackle the most complex environmental challenges facing our warming planet. We know that what we do here in Massachusetts to protect nature will mean a better future for people and the planet. We have an exciting program for you today. We'll be chatting with Jocelyn Forbush, Acting President and CEO of the Trustees. Jocelyn will talk about the important places the Trustees protect, from trails to gardens to beaches. She'll also touch on their history and some special initiatives, including their strategy to respond to the changing coast and their Boston Waterfront Initiative. She'll also share how you can get involved with the Trustees this summer. But first, I'll tell you a little bit more about our guest. Jocelyn Forbush is Acting President and CEO of the Trustees and has served the organization for more than 20 years in a range of positions, which gives her both a depth of knowledge and an expansive view of the work. Jocelyn is a formally trained ecologist, and prior to working with the Trustees, she worked for the Riverways Program of Mass Fisheries and Wildlife and the Quebec Labrador Foundation. She earned her Master's of Forest Science from the Yale School of Forestry, a Master of Music from McGill University, and a Bachelor of Music from Northwestern University. As you think of questions for Jocelyn, please enter them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Thanks again so much for joining us today. Let's dive in. Over to you, Jocelyn.
All right, hopefully you all can see me. So apologies for the delay, a little technology on our end. But thank you so much, Allison, for the introduction. It's great to be here. And we are thrilled to have the opportunity to talk with you today. We are great admirers of the Nature Conservancy, and we've have certainly traveled many paths of our work together, certainly in my several decades now in conservation. In particular, we are terrific partners, certainly currently on our public policy work up at the State House, working on everything from natural climate solutions to the American Rescue Plan. So very active collaborators in the Green Budget Coalition. But also, as you'll hear from me as we go through the presentation, really terrific partners in our land conservation strategy development, and also in thinking through our coastal initiative and partnership opportunities there. So we're very grateful to be alongside all of you. And I'm pleased today to be able to share a little bit more about the Trustees. And I'm sure that many of you are familiar with us, but it's a great opportunity for me to share a brief introduction for those of you who are new to the Trustees, and also give you a bit of an update on where we are. So just to dive in, as many of you may know, we were founded in 1891. We are the nation's oldest land trust and the largest in Massachusetts. Our founder, Charles Eliot, I think next slide, you'll see him, was a protege of Frederick Law Olmsted, who was a landscape architect, and in the late 1800s was very disturbed by what he was seeing in the urban landscape right here in Boston. With the explosion of industry, and the real changes in the landscape here in Boston, and this was both about the land, but also the waters and the shores. Eliot and others became increasingly concerned about the quality of life, the lack of open space access, in particular for the working class. And so was very concerned about what he felt was the disappearing features, those iconic elements that make Massachusetts unique and special, and also give the opportunity for people to connect with them. So the basic principle for the trustees really has been part of the DNA that we work from over our now over 130 years in business. And we continue to hold this idea in everything that we do today. On the founding of Elliott, we were actually created by an act of the state legislature. And it was the first public land trust, first of its kind in not only the nation, but also in the world. And many of you may know that the charter for the trustees went across the pond to establish the National Trust of England and national trusts around the world. Since then, we were established, as I mentioned, under an act of legislation, although certainly in the decades since, the evolution of the sector of conservation has, of course, lifted us out of that legislation and put us within the context of other nonprofit conservation organizations, both here in Massachusetts and around the country. Today, our mission, though, is somewhat different than many of our other conservation partners, in that we have both a strong and holistic approach to conservation, which is not only about environment, but also about history and culture and landscape. And we are dually focused and strongly focused on the preservation and access by the public to these great places. So we have always those two elements of our mission that we hold in all the work that we do. These days, we protect some of the most iconic places in the Commonwealth. We took on our first property in 1899. That's out in Stockbridge at Monument Mountain. And up through today, we now have natural properties, cultural sites, and agricultural properties as well. When we look at our natural properties, we protect beaches, woodlands, mountains, places that we use for camping and other types of outdoor recreation. That includes about 350 miles of hiking trails. And we do have one very special national natural landmark, and that's Bartholomew's Cobble out in Sheffield. We are very focused on our beaches and coastal areas, more and more complex. And I'll talk a little bit more about our efforts there later on. We protect 120 miles of coastline in Massachusetts, both through our own ownership and through conservation restrictions that we hold with private landowners. 6 of the beaches that we own are open and accessible to the public. And lastly, when we look at our agricultural properties and our working farms, we have 5 community farms where we host community-supported agriculture programs, productive vegetable growing, livestock operations. We have educational programs, including summer camps, and we also have around 2,000 acres of grasslands and farm fields that we manage, stretching out across the state that we care for. Also wanted to mention our community gardens, which we think of both as an extension of our agriculture, but also as spectacular sort of wildlands and natural spaces, in particular for us in the community of Boston. We manage a network of 56 community gardens in Boston, primarily in majority neighborhoods like Mattapan and Dorchester. And that work comes about through an integration with the Boston Natural Areas Network that we initiated in the mid-2000s. When we look at our historic houses and properties, which is a significant and also differentiating element for the trustees, we have an extraordinary array of different types of historic and cultural sites. We have 11 historic homesteads and their historic object collections. We have 6 national historic landmarks and also 6 additional properties that are listed on the National Register of Historic Places. We also have a couple of sites that we run as inns, and also several of the most recognized views and cultural landscapes, the legacies of design and art and the landscape in Massachusetts. And here you see the LA at Castle Hill. In addition, we've had a major focus in recent years on our public gardens, an important cultural landscape that we manage. And also even more recently, we've integrated with 2 museums, again, looking to preserve both the culture of our past, but also to create the culture of today and the future at our Fruitlands Museum and also the Cordova Sculpture Park and Museum. And both have expanded our work in the presentation of contemporary art and bringing opportunities for the public to see our places in new ways. So where we work, and always good to take a look at the map. Today we have 120 properties that you see here, from the Berkshires to the North Shore, out to the islands. In total, we've protected over 75,000 acres of land in Massachusetts in our 130 years. 1/3 of that land has been protected and we no longer hold it. It's either in the hands of the state or protected in private hands. 1/3 of the 75,000 acres we've protected is in our conservation restriction program. So that's where we work with almost 400 landowners across the state to protect roughly 27,000 acres. And then lastly, what you do see here on this map are what we call our reservations. And we have, as I mentioned, 120 of these. Half of Massachusetts residents live within 5 miles of a trustee's property. And one of the goals that has continued to be a focus of the trustees is to continue to provide that access and proximity to all of Massachusetts to our open space. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how we think about our work, and perhaps differently or in concert with others in the conservation community. First, we know that conservation work is not static and that we are constantly reinventing and thinking about how our mission can live and thrive and serve our communities in this modern era. That means we are constantly responding to demands of the contemporary world, and we're looking frequently at new initiatives that are growing at a pace, that are trying to keep focused on new outcomes and impacts. Related to that, as the organization that is essentially at the beginning of the conservation movement, we take that weight of legacy and history quite seriously. And we do hold our place as a leader still in conservation. And we look to model best practices and look to be the first to jump into challenging areas of work, new areas for innovation, and have a DNA within the organization that is focused on and thinking about how we can take some of these risks that are oftentimes what can move our sector forward. Now, as an organization with a roughly $46 million annual budget that's present in over 80 communities across the Commonwealth, we can really also leverage our scale. And this is especially important, as I mentioned at the top of the program, at the State House, in our public policy work. And we really can represent more and more a statewide voice. But it also means that we can build efficiencies in our work, such as working with our 5 farm operations as one farm in concept and efficiency. And it also means we can test and trial new ideas and actually experiment with multiple sites in research, using our properties as platforms for our own research and learning as we move new initiatives forward. So how are we different, and how have we evolved with conservation? Really, since our beginning, our early leadership was driven by the focus on protecting iconic places that would connect with the public, and that remains true today. That said, within that, we've always been thinking about how changing dynamics of conservation and the role that it plays in any given time. Things like the use of conservation restrictions, agricultural preservation restrictions that we were a key part of shaping many decades ago. Very much thinking about how we innovate in conservation strategy over the years. And this has very much grown and changed as our own size and impact has shifted over the years. We were once very much focused on building the capacity of the land trust movement in Massachusetts. But really, with the growth and professionalization of those peer regional land trusts in the past several decades, we have stepped back from that role, although are very much a partner and a participation and have participation in the statewide land conservation movement, we focus more these days on larger, complex initiatives, on conservation of properties that have multiple resources in need of protection. And also we're deeply, deeply focused on how we can engage the public in our movement. Public use is very much at the core of our mission, and we take it very seriously. And we've seen over the years, the demands of our visitors have changed dramatically as demographics have changed. We continue to shift our approach to connecting with the public, and with continued focus on an adaptation in this area over the last decade, we have seen really 100% growth in our audience work, meaning 100% growth in public programming, extraordinary growth in visitation, in our membership, which for us is heartening, not only in support of the organization, but the idea that we are building a movement and we are building a constituency that is in this work with us. During the pandemic, we have experienced a huge surge of interest, as I know have so many in open space field. And we were prepared for that surge, interestingly, just timing in particular, and captured a whole new group of visitors and members, and have actually seen historic highs in participation in the organization. We're now focused as we're going forward in keeping these new audiences engaged with us and connected to our mission, as this work, as you all know, is really never done. Like many organizations, we have focused on diversity as a core value for many years, especially as we have embraced our mission to engage the public even more deeply in the last decade. In our current strategic plan momentum, we have built more concretely and intentionally into our work in this area, and recently have hired a key internal leader, our managing director for community impact, who has worked alongside our board to articulate a roadmap or a plan that really pushes us forward strategically and intentionally in our work to become an organization committed even more deeply to equity, diversity, and belonging. We know that there are other colleagues across organizations that are making this critical progress, and we know that this is a journey and that we have a long way to go, but we are excited to see progress and to be seeing the broader movement focused in this area as well. We are very aware of the importance and also the opportunity of reaching urban residents and people of different races and ethnicities who might not feel welcomed at our places. And we are looking at ways to create more welcoming places where all feel invited and feel a sense of belonging. This work requires partnerships for us, and we have begun this work, but again, we, like many others in our field, have a long way to go. Through our public programming and our education work, we have a very strong focus on families and kids, and we dedicate roughly a third of our programming on family-focused efforts, getting that next generation outdoors and engaged with us. We now have 7 summer camps, and we are expanding that every year in both sizes and where in our state we are providing those opportunities. We are also getting deeper into school partnership work, and we look forward to that area of our work blossoming in the coming years. We are, of course, a place for nature lovers, from bird watchers, those interested in geology, other areas of the sciences. We offer so many places and ways to learn and to get more involved. With the broad diversity of places in the portfolio, we really do have a lot of opportunity to explore. We have an exceptional ecology staff on board, and they are working, whether it's protecting habitat, focused on natural climate solution opportunities for the organization, thinking about our agricultural ecology initiative, working on educating visitors, volunteers, and members, and really trying to engage people in the unique landscapes of Massachusetts. We're also thinking about how people are connecting with the outdoors through their outdoor experiences, in particular recreation. This is an expanding work, and it's how a lot of people both come to the trustees and experience us through their lives. We have found that things like well-groomed trails in the woods for walking and hiking are okay for some of our audience, but actually connecting to and learning about the outdoors sometimes requires some additional facilitation. So we have been expanding our outdoor recreational offerings and getting into new communities with roving recreational program and teams who are focused on lesser known and more remote places. We've also begun some new partnerships that will help us invite new audiences that may not have felt welcome to our places before. Our goal really to be focused on belonging, to build that sense of belonging at our properties. We have also expanded our work in our cultural realm. And I mentioned earlier using contemporary art as a real platform for attracting new audiences to our places while stimulating new conversations about our sites. What we call our art and landscape program is now integrated into the work at our De Cordova Sculpture Park and Museum, which we integrated with 2 years ago. And we have plans for more commissioned pieces of outdoor art, including new works by an Indigenous artist coming in this year. As I mentioned earlier, this is an important program for us in engaging people in looking at our sites and engaging in these key issues of our times in new ways. Most of all, though, we are holding central to the idea that we really need to support that next generation of conservationists, instilling the love of the outdoors and nature so that we do have a next generation who will care for and protect these places and those places to come forever. So what's in our future and where are we headed? I wanted to talk about just a couple of highlights, key initiatives that we have underway right now. To start, I wanted to highlight our Boston Waterfront Initiative. And this is an effort to build a series of iconic waterfront parks along the Boston waterfront. This is an effort that's been underway for several years, but it's really just this last year that we secured our first site with the designation of a dilapidated pier in East Boston, which is owned by the Massachusetts Port Authority. And we have been designated as the developer of an open space site. We are building a new park on the water. This site is going to be designed to be a resilient open space. You can see here a rendering. This was created by Michael van Valkenburg, the designer who we're working with on this project. It is really meant to provide access to the water for communities in and around East Boston and Boston writ large and beyond. I mentioned earlier that our founder, Charles Elliott, was very focused on access to these spectacular places, not just the land, but really our coasts and our oceans. So this is a great opportunity for us to be building that kind of access in a city where it is very much limited. We are in a community design process right now for the Boston Waterfront Initiative, and we will be unveiling plans and designs in these coming months as we get further into the fundraising effort and into codifying the construction and other schedules to come. We are also, in the meanwhile, pursuing other opportunities along the Boston waterfront in addition to this new pier that we'll be building. I wanted to also talk a little bit about our coastal initiative. This has been an effort to respond really to the changing coastline. And I mentioned that the Trustees is the steward of roughly 120 miles of our shoreline here in Massachusetts. And we are ourselves constantly dealing with and thinking about how we can be better stewards in the face of what is increasing changes in our coastal landscape. This effort, this coastal initiative, is really a multi-pronged effort for us that's looking at land conservation strategy. We're thinking about innovative stewardship approaches, research and ecology, outreach and marketing, really building the love of the coast, engagement of volunteers, and also really increasing our own thought leadership and state and national leadership in this area. We are just about to release our second edition of a publication called State of the Coast, which is going region by region up and down the Massachusetts coast, looking at climate impacts and proposed solutions. This year, we are looking at Martha's Vineyard, at Nantucket, and the Elizabethan Islands. We will roll this publication out on the vineyard starting on August 4th and on Nantucket on August 5th. Within our coastal strategy, one of our major successes has been an intervention project up in the Great Marsh, where we own a significant portion of the Great Marsh landscape alongside a number of other conservation organizations and agencies. We have been looking at an innovative ditch remediation process in order to sustain this marsh and help it to keep up with sea level rise. This is an innovative trial, although it has gathered much attention from both the state, but also the feds. And we have just received $1 million NACA grant to support this effort. We are also here, I should mention, looking at a blue carbon approach here, sort of a carbon management strategy in the Great Marsh as well. We also have coastal wave and sediment studies underway in several locations, and are looking also on the North Shore in the area of our Crane Beach on Argilla Road in Ipswich, an important road and culvert project thinking about innovative solutions, again, with marshes and sea level rise adjacent to roads that are sitting far too low. So with that, I will close up. Hopefully that was a helpful overview for you all of the trustees, where we've come from and where we are, and a little bit of where we're headed. I'd be happy to turn this back to you, Allison, and take any questions that might be helpful, but thank you.
Thanks so much, Jocelyn, for sharing some of the trustees' history and new initiatives with us. We at TNC really respect the work that you all do, and obviously you're a really important partner for us. So with that, we can jump into some discussion. And a quick reminder for our audience, as you think of questions for Jocelyn, enter them in that Q&A box that you see at the bottom of your screen. But since I'm the host and I've known you for a long time, I'm going to take the privilege of asking you the first question. So you've just stepped into a really big new role. Congratulations. And during a time that's been really challenging for everyone, how are you doing with that? Do you have any reflections on, the last year and going forward?
Yeah, great question. Hard not to have a lot of reflections. It's been a remarkable year for all of us, certainly within the pandemic, and certainly for the trustees. Our CEO, Barbara Erickson, and certainly a great friend of mine and others within the organization, passed away in January. And so it has been an additional challenge over and above the pandemic. That said, Barbara was ill for quite a stretch before January. So in some level, we had an opportunity as an organization to prepare for this transition stretch. We didn't expect a pandemic on top of it. But that said, as I mentioned earlier, this has been a moment where the mission and work of the trustees has had a relevance beyond any time I think we've ever seen in our history. So the organization has in many ways really thrived in ways that we did not expect, really the silver lining. As I mentioned earlier, with a culture of innovation and some entrepreneurship, we were really able to quickly pivot early on in the pandemic with an extraordinary team of staff out on our properties and leadership, thinking about our business model, thinking about how we can continue to connect people to the outdoors and our places. And we have a diversified scope of operations, so we were able to sort of rebalance throughout the year. So extremely challenging, like it has been for so many of us. But I think all in all, a good year. We were very appreciative of the partnerships with TNC, the state. So many of us were in lots of conversation throughout the year of how do we manage open spaces in this moment. And those conversations, as you know, are not done yet, but it's been great to have such a tremendous partnership through that process as well. So thank you for asking.
Yeah, and you had just such an amazing set of challenges there. So good for you for seeing that through, and it's so exciting to see all the progress that is happening. I mean, another huge topic that has come to the forefront in the world and in conservation is in the last year. You talked about belonging and touched on equity and inclusion as a goal. Russ Cohen, one of our attendees, says that he was pleased to see that the text on the map for the Trustees Land of Providence property in Holyoke is in both English and Spanish. So he asked specifically, are the trustees planning to do that elsewhere? And I would expand a little bit on that and see if you had other examples of particular places or things that you wanted to talk about on that belonging front.
It's a great question, and thank you, Russ, for making your way out to Land of Providence, a very special spot out there in the Pioneer Valley. So the short answer to Russ's question is yes, and I'll talk through a few, maybe a broader picture of how we're thinking about this area, and some examples as well. So we know that every organization is engaged in these conversations, in this work. We are no exception. And we have had diversity, as I mentioned, as a value within the organization for quite a long time, for at least as long as I've been here in my 20-year tenure. And in this moment, I mentioned the roadmap that we have created with staff and with our board. And that does outline a number of different areas and different perspectives that we're taking and areas where we're working. So for example, we are certainly looking at we're looking inward, we're looking at our internal workforce, our hiring practices and our composition. We're looking at governance. We're also looking outward at our audience. And so who is coming to our properties, who is not? What does our visitation look like, and how accessible are our places? We are also looking at areas like vendors and sort of where are our dollars going within the community as we spend stewardship and other resources. So a broad element, a broad set of areas and a number of different elements. We are looking at diversity from a variety of different perspectives, gender, race, ethnicity, mobility, ability to access, LGBTQ, so really trying to take a broad look. And we also are engaging quite a bit with our Indigenous community. So depending on where we are in the state, we have different tribes, and we've been building relationships over the last many years in conversation and in presentation and relationship at those sites. We are looking as to answer a longer version of Russ's question, when you look at our work at Land of Providence, our garden up at Stevens Coolidge Place, for example, in North Andover that we just invested in significantly. We have multiple languages on that signage. So we are thinking more and more as we are going through our interpretation work and our marketing and outreach work, who are we talking to and how are we speaking? And I mentioned our Boston Waterfront Initiative as well. And we are doing a quite broad community engagement process in our design effort, which has included design sessions in both English and held also in Spanish, so not just translation. And that also includes online surveys in multiple languages so that we can actually engage in a much broader conversation with those who don't connect to us in English. So that's been extraordinarily fruitful. We've had really terrific response and engagement and a much more productive planning process there, and we know that we'll carry that forward into further work.
Excellent. So Gail Rosenfeld has two questions that I think are linked. So, that piece we just talked about, diversity, equity, and inclusion, which has become such a big focus for us and many others in the conservation movement. Some of our traditional supporters are saying, really? How does that fit together? And so the broader question is, from Gail, is that it seems like the trustees are involved in many more different areas now than before. How do you keep the focus for preservation and funding and all these varied projects? And then a prior question was specifically about the art, which seems like kind of a new a new area, how do you think about that portfolio and resource that portfolio of effort?
Great, and pardon me, I'm just reading Gail's question specifically. So it's a great question, and it really, I would say the last decade, we have been focusing on the full breadth of the organization's mission, which is on some level challenging in that breadth because we hold the natural, we hold the cultural, and we hold the public interaction. But it's also a huge opportunity for us. And we do know that particularly as the organization moved so well, I would say since the 60s and 70s in the environmental movement with the land trust community in environmental protection and environmental stewardship, we've had work to do on the cultural side of the work. And so what does it mean for an organization like the Trustees to hold and support and steward the cultural legacy of our state, in addition to the environmental? And ultimately, as you know, these things are inseparable, but they are articulated, of course, quite differently. So it's a very important part of our mission. It always has been. It's not a divergence from who we are. It has, in fact, been an embrace. So our work in focusing on our public gardens, on investing in our historic sites has been as important to us as thinking about climate change, our coastal initiative, natural climate solutions, natural habitat management. It makes us a very diverse organization. It means we have a technical expertise within the organization that's very broad. And that is something that is very exciting. The arts in particular, so as caretakers of culture in Massachusetts, we actually have an extraordinary collection of historic objects that are, many of them, extraordinary pieces of art. And that is art of the past. And that has been art often created in reflection of the landscape. And so one of the opportunities we see with De Cordova, and also our Fruitlands Museum, these are places that are not just about the art as our properties. They are art in reflection of landscape, and they bring and broaden audiences, and they engage us in conversations through art, through landscape, that we feel we need to have, whether it's art that's connected to climate or questions of inclusion and belonging, whether it's art that's focused on landscape. So there are a lot of different ways that these things can really interconnect, and they root back again into a very broad and very rich mission.
So that makes me think of another question. You personally have significant training in the arts as a musician. So how does that influence your work and thinking today? Does it come into it?
It's a great question. And one of the things I love about the Trustees is that the background of the individuals who work here is often quite diverse. So though I am an ecologist with a music background, that's not particularly unusual within the Trustees. So it is an exceptionally talented group of staff that has an ability, I think, to make a lot of these connections about what is fundamentally our quality of life here in Massachusetts, and to be able to think about what are those pieces that matter. And absolutely conservation and environment, absolutely culture and landscape, and what it means to belong and to be of this place. So for me, it is in some ways a seamless knitting of the perspective that I've carried. I actually came, I think, to conservation by practicing my French horn up at Acadia National Park in the great outdoors. So I was inspired by Charles Eliot up there early on. But that was just a personal experience that I think fuels me, and others have found their path in an integrated way as well.
Very interesting. Yes, there are a lot of people in conservation who have all kinds of different backgrounds, which is really, really cool. I think there's a lot to be said for having a diversity of perspectives, even within one person. Lots of different talents and skill sets to draw on. So you have a fan here, Robert Edgerton. I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly. Says very impressive presentation. And I'm proud to be a long-term trustees member. So I'll say thank you, Robert, for the trustees. He has an operations question, and there are a couple sort of along these lines. How many people does it take to run this diversity of programs? How much of the annual budget is devoted to programming? And then there's another question here about where that money comes from. What are the major sources of revenue?
Yeah, great questions. And thank you, Robert, for being a longtime member and friend to the trustees. So the majority, not surprisingly, of our budget is our staff. And we are a staff of about 240 year-round staff, and that blossoms up to around 900 staff in our spring, summer, fall season, the outdoor season. So and that has been growing significantly as the organization has grown to really focus in particular, as he mentions, on programming. Now, programming has a big, broad definition in house. So we do public programming. As you know, we have an array of events. One could consider our camping and other outdoor experiences also programmed. So it's a little hard to put a specific number on that, but I would say that we're looking at probably 75% of our budget is likely around is focused on that, on staff that's taking care of properties, doing programming work. So it's been a tremendous journey in the pandemic to keep everyone going and on board with within that, but we were pleased that we were able to do so and to continue to focus in that area.
So Cynthia Diprunner had a question about how the pandemic has changed demand for your outdoor programming. Yeah. And so how you've responded to that, and do you have thoughts on how you continue to sort of build on that interest that's been created in the pandemic?
Yeah, that's a great question. And before I get there, I'll answer the second part of Robert's question, which I realized I forgot to do, which is the profile of support for the organization. We do have a good diversified profile of support. We have an endowment, which is important to us. It used to be a major piece of our support over the last 2 decades. That has come into, I think, a much healthier range of support. If you look at our annual report, you'll see that roughly a quarter to a fifth of the support for the organization. We have a very strong membership growth over this last several years, and that's been critically important. Philanthropy as well, and that's of all shapes and sizes, largely private philanthropy, relatively little revenue from the state. So I mentioned that NACA grant, and that's an unusual and significant sized public grant for us. And then lastly, and another growing area is the earned revenue, the earned income area. And so this is the camping and those public events that you see. It's our kayak tours, it's our winter celebrations. And so these areas make a very much more diversified portfolio for us financially, which means that in any given year, we have an opportunity to remain healthy, to shift across those areas. And sorry, remind me, I've now, pandemic changes, sorry. So how are we retaining demand? We moved very swiftly last year within the pandemic to engage and stay connected with our visitors, with the public. We were at a position in time where we were actually focused on an important digital strategy. So we have actually morphed to significant digital relationships in this time period when we couldn't be together, and that was so important. And so our new website has been important. We have a new online ticketing opportunity. So these are ways that people can connect with us really in the midst of this pandemic. We continue to run the programming and do the outreach and continue to shift the programming so it's supportive of this moment in time. So for example, while people were having so much trouble finding opportunities to meet with friends and family last year, Many of our staff created essentially pizza picnics or outings so that families could get together. They've had good reasons and places to get together and be safe and outdoors, and supported in that by our staff. That's something that's continued. So we've learned a lot through the programming and through conversation with our visitors on what is supporting us all through not only this moment and then the future. And so we have a really spectacular sort of visitor and audience engagement team here who keeps really important track of and connection with what our constituencies are really looking for.
That's great. So there's a couple of specific questions about Boston and the waterfront. So one, could you say a little bit more about your goals and approaches for making the Boston waterfront resilient and accessible? And perhaps the second part of that is by investing in that waterfront and potentially in some underserved communities, are you thinking about some potential downsides like gentrification and ways to manage that? So first part, what are you doing in the Boston area? And second part, are you thinking about gentrification and avoiding that?
Yeah, great question. So the first part, we are specifically focused on really on mitigation here, right? Sorry, adaptation with our park, or set of parks. We've been in conversation with the city of Boston over the last 6 years, with others in the city of Boston on how can we address the major flood issues and sea level rise issues that are confronting Boston. The fundamental concept for these parks is that they are both solutions, but also provide proof of concept. They're not going to solve all of the challenges of Boston from the perspective of storm surge and sea level rise, but they can solve some, and they can also model some natural solutions, some green infrastructure solutions that we think are really important, not just for Boston, but for our whole coast to be advancing more aggressively and more actively. So we are looking in particular at what we call Pierce Park 3, which is the project we're engaged in East Boston. That is at a point in the coast of East Boston that is a flood infiltration corridor, as has been modeled. And so our park and the adjacent land around that will be designed to essentially address storm surge and protect the neighborhood behind. So that is in some ways a very localized focus, but we are in conversation and partnership with the city and other landowners to think about how we can extend that across a broader area of that East Boston coast. The gentrification question is not a new one, as you all know, for conservation in more broadly. And over in East Boston, it's a really critical one. Those of you who know Boston and know East Boston in particular, you'll know that it has already been changing dramatically. And so this trajectory of gentrification and just transition of the population who's living and working in Boston is really on the move. We have been working, though, as part of our Waterfront Initiative on an equity development plan that is looking at everything from what does it mean for us to look at our construction process and sort of vendors and minority and women-owned business engagement, to what is the kind of programming and who are the constituencies we want to serve. But we're also looking at policies and partnerships in East Boston that could actually be some solutions to or some opportunities for us to be helpful in the conversation of affordable housing and home ownership. This is a new area for us. We're just at the beginning of these discussions, but we are in discussion with a number of those organizations over in East Boston on how can we not only build this great open space, but also be talking more holistically about East Boston in how it grows and develops. So things are moving quickly in the development community. So it's a conversation that needs to happen at pace. But it's definitely one we're very sensitive to, especially given Boston's recent history.
That's great. Thank you. It is amazing how quickly you run out to things that many people might perceive to be pretty far from conservation, and yet everything is connected. And so when we think about our goals, thinking out to all the things that affected and how our work affects the community at large. So I'm really glad that you're putting that level of care into thinking about that. It's such an important issue. So that's, we've touched on climate justice in adaptation there. There's a question from Laurel Facey about forests and wetlands as important factors in mitigating climate change. So I have perhaps a little bit broader question of if you'd like to talk a bit, as Massachusetts thinks about trying to get to net zero, what are your top priorities for tackling climate change as an organization, and what are you most interested in partnering on with TNC?
Yeah, it's a great question. We've already started working with you all, certainly on both the natural climate solutions conversation at the state level, at the coastal initiative. We talked coastal buyback program. So our coast focus has been sort of the tip of the spear for us in some of these climate discussions, and that, though, does not represent the full view. We are also, as I mentioned, focused right now on an agroecology sort of a study and an initiative at our farm at Appleton Farms up on the North Shore, which we hope to really be looking at natural habitat management, carbon management, and production. And how do these elements work together, which is, of course, something of which there's a good body of research, in particular the large production farms, say Midwest, central US, but very little in New England. So we are working with a consortium of other organizations and thinking about that kind of agricultural component and climate, because there's a lot of thinking going on there. We are also, and I know have partnered in the past and have good conversations to come on the forest management component. We have just engaged ourselves on a forest carbon assessment. And this, at this point, is not necessarily from the perspective for us of a marketplace conversation. It's really an information gathering, sort of what is our inventory, what is that opportunity set that we have. We have been very light managers of our forests. We've largely not managed our forests, although they are the majority of the properties that we own across the state. So we want to learn from that carbon perspective, what do we hold and what contribution might we be able to make with any kind of incremental change or management. So those are a number of different areas. We certainly have some work to do within our own house on sustainability. As you know, we have a broad operation and some footprint across the state. So are getting into discussions on how we can mitigate that as well. And that has been underway for a number of years, and we have a ways to go there as well.
Great, thank you. Well, we've covered quite a bit of ground today. Where can people who've been listening learn more about the trustees and the places you protect and the events that you're offering?
We have a terrific website, as I mentioned. It has just been refreshed, so hopefully even easier to navigate. You can also visit us at our 120 places. Probably there are all of those online today have something within shooting distance. So I hope you can certainly find online on our app where you might want to go, whether that's just for a walk, whether that's for a program. We have a whole range of programs and events that within the COVID context we have ongoing throughout the summer, going into the fall, knock on wood. We're all able to still get out and about. So very much look forward to meeting some of those who are on the call today out on properties, and certainly welcome those who are on today to engage in our membership as well, which you can find more information about online, which is also a terrific way to both get information about the trustees, but even more specific opportunities on how to connect and news on what we are doing.
Great. Any final thoughts to share before we wrap up our time together?
I don't think so. It's been a great and broad conversation. I really appreciate the opportunity, and again, want to reiterate how grateful we are both to you, Allison, and so many others at TNC who have been such an important part, both in working alongside us, but also so many times asking those great questions and motivating us, and developing some of these key initiatives that we're focused on today. So thank you wholeheartedly for that partnership and for the opportunity to talk with you all today.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. It was a great discussion. I really enjoyed it. And I'll extend thanks to everyone who tuned in for your support of the Nature Conservancy and the trustees. Of course, your support is what makes all of our work possible. So we'll be sending everyone a follow-up email over the coming days with links to the resources we talked about today, as well as a recording of the webinar. If you're enjoying our webinars, please share them with your friends. And you can also follow us on social media at conserve_MA on Facebook and Instagram to keep up with our work and get updates on upcoming virtual opportunities to connect with us. Hopefully, as Jocelyn said, we'll have more opportunities to connect in person sometime soon. As always, you can see our upcoming webinars and sign up at nature.org/MA webinars. And you can join us on August 5th for a, quote, not so boring history of conservation. TNC's Craig Lesher will give us a mix of stories and surprising facts that covers the origins of the conservation movement, the birth and growth of the major conservation NGOs, the evolution of conservation thinking, and the enduring debate on utilization of nature versus preservation of nature. His goal is to inform and entertain you and give you at least one cool conservation story or fact that you can share with others. I've heard Craig speak, and I'm pretty sure that you won't want to miss that opportunity. So thank you again for joining us today, and have a wonderful afternoon. Bye-bye.